Hello and welcome back to the Comic Literate podcast, the podcast that does deep dives into the best of comic books, graphic novels, mangas, and penny dreadfuls. I'm your host, the soon-to-be known as Comic Stan, and with me, as always, is my individualistic host, it's Jamie.
I resent individualistic.
But you are an individual by definition.
Everyone's an individual, but individualism is definitely politically fraught.
I had no idea about that, and that is a learning point for me today.
That is 100% the political ideology that Margaret Thatcher was espousing.
Are you saying you're not like Margaret Thatcher?
I cannot think of a human being who I would less like to be associated with than the milk snatcher. For our American listeners
who may only know her from such themes as Margaret Thatcher Child Snatcher or something.
I imagine most Americans, for Americans don't know about anything that doesn't happen in the continental United States, wouldn't have a clue who Margaret Thatcher was. So she was the first female Prime Minister of the UK, and she was, by all intents and purposes, a cunt.
Typical Comic Literate podcast. It's not even a few minutes before we're talking about ex-prime ministers and calling them cunts. It's a classic 1-2 whammy from us.
I cannot think of a human being more deserving of that moniker than Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, 100%. I am in agreement. And as are most British people, I would say. It's one of the few things that does seem to unite. Even their own party seem to be like, actually, they're jumping on the bandwagon.
I mean, she was
cool.
ousted by the talk. Like, she wasn't liked in her own party. I think it's weird when you meet a Thatcherite, because you're like, what?
You still exist?
Yeah, like, have you not read anything?
I will say with her, this is the one caveat that I'll always use when talking about her. It's impressive what she achieved as a woman in her time in British politics.
Oh, definitely.
When you look at it from an amoralistic standpoint, it's like when a serial killer gets really high numbers. You go, look, I'm not condoning it, but that is impressive.
If you don't like minors, you can be impressed by it. Yeah, I get it.
If you're not a fan of unions, then yes.
How are you?
I'm building up the enthusiasm. Sometimes you got to reach deep down a little bit for it.
Dig
deep a little bit. And it's not through any major thing that's happened. Sometimes you have a bit of a malaise kind of day.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're doing something good. And I need to fake it a little bit till I make it. And then when I make it, it'll be fine.
Yeah, once I'm there and I'm doing it, it'll be fun.
Exactly.
I always feel that way about exercise.
I
don't want to go, and I know I'll feel really good once I'm doing it.
The people who espouse this whole exercise makes me feel good. Bollocks. I've never once felt good about exercise, except for the feeling that I don't have to do again for X amount of time. I've done it, so it's done. The same completing a chore. It's done. I now don't have to worry about it until I
feel
next have to
good
do it.
about an hour after I've exercised.
I think I definitely feel better for having done it. It's the only reason I do it now is not only to try and live longer, but I generally feel better when I'm exercising. But the actual act has never made me feel better.
No.
At best, it's distracted me from whatever else is going on. Because whether if your house is being repossessed or, something, your job is going shitty or whatever else is happening in your life, someone doesn't like you, when you are absolutely gasping for air, when you've just struggled to get to the end of an exercise, you are not thinking about anything else. So in that regard, it is it's a good distraction for points, and can reframe your psychology and what have you. But those people are I get endorphins from running. You are a freak.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that one that when people are really into drugs, people who don't do drugs will be just go running, and you're at what point?
I'm high on life. You've never been high.
There's a great comedian who said that he was at the end of a 5-mile run, and he just looked at the guy and he was like, at what point does this feel like heroin?
I mean, I too am wondering that, to be fair.
Yeah, absolutely.
But unlike exercise, this is something that will benefit us and the listeners, because we are going to deep dive into a comic that I've been looking forward to doing for quite a while. It's one I've been banging on about for ages.
I know.
And your enthusiasm is a little clue for me of how this is going to go. But have you seen from the title, we are covering the 2018 run of The Immortal Hulk, which is a comic that I read and found very good in kind of breaking the normal superhero bollocks, especially with the Hulk genre. It was written by Al Ewing, a British writer also. We stand up and we salute. In the
unfold the Union Jack I always have in my drawer.
What is it you've done to me before? It's like on a famously non-visual medium, you've done a physical act that only I can see. Penciled by Joe Bennett, inks by Rui Jose. It's R-U-I. I don't know if it's Guy. I tried to put an R on Guy, but it just didn't come out of my
Guy.
It's the word guy, but instead of the G. Yeah. And colors by Paul Mounts, and specifically something I was a very big fan of, the cover art by a actually well-known cover artist, Alex Ross.
Okay.
So if you're in the medium at all, you've almost certainly seen an Alex Ross cover.
Anything I've read and enjoyed?
Not since we've done it so far. I mean, he might have done a variant cover, but cool. Most famously, his covers are, I think, most famous from a Superman run.
Right.
God, I can't remember the name of it. That is absolutely terrible of me to come in so unprepared, but at least I have the Google page open where I can frantically try and open it up to find the thing that I'm talking about. And it is the Kingdom Come series. So that is a interesting kind of alt world special of DC superheroes, basically Superman in the future, and all the modern superheroes are dicks. And he's like, what happened to truth, justice, and the American way? But it's really good. It's better than I've made out to be. But so the covers you've seen on these issues of Immortal Hulk, all Alex Ross, and it's a very unique style.
I like the cover art.
Yeah, exactly. And he always nails like a vibe in the cover art, and with a unique style as well.
I like the art in general.
The art was fantastic. I'm big on the art in this.
So I think they did a great job with Hulk.
Oh, you mean the look of the Hulk?
Yeah, 100%.
Yes.
Like the way that the Hulk looked, I went back and looked at some of the more recent iterations of Hulk leading up to this one. And this was by far, I think, the most menacing and the most present.
And very tied into the context of the story. Like, it's art and story working hand in hand.
And then there was this moment where the reporter was getting the same story from a bunch of different people. And each one of them in their retelling had a completely different art style.
Yes, that was a great issue.
And that was probably my favorite issue of the sort of 10 or 11 that I read. I thought it was the most interesting because the art was doing a lot of the heavy lifting to tell that little chunk of the story.
Especially a different vibe to each retelling. So like one 100%. Was scary, one was like rom-com, one was like just a classic superhero, like 60s superhero vibe.
And then there was one that kind of looked like a what was the comedy channel on American TV? Comedy Central.
Comedy Central. Well, one of them, yeah.
There was one that kind of looked like a Comedy Central, like Beavis and Butthead vibe.
Yes, yeah.
And so the art in general, I thought it was really nicely penciled, and I thought there was a great use of perspective. And so actually, because, you know, you're dealing with Hulk, and so there was some great moments where we were kind of seeing him...
Big and small.
Yeah, well, we were seeing him, and then we were seeing him in the next panel relative to somebody that he was talking with. And so, you know, you've got this really up close, menacing look at his face and his features, and particularly the way the teeth were drawn in his grimace, I thought was really good. And then you see him fucking holding somebody, and you're like, yeah, that's the Hulk, man.
Yeah. I did think while reading this, I thought something you would enjoy particularly was the artist's depiction of eyes and with regards to facial features.
Well, yeah, because everyone was looking in the right direction.
And not just that, this is the other extreme to the complaints you've had before. I felt like this one was every character's eyes were giving across an emotion in every panel.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and I think that's really relevant because there's a lot of panels where Bruce is looking in a mirror at the Hulk, right? And so you see this very like potent Hulk and a kind of tortured Banner, and that really comes across in those panels, in those moments.
And specifically when the Hulk's looking like straight dead on at you.
Yeah, it's fucking menacing, isn't it?
Exactly. And that really... The art, like, I always talk about, like, the art is serviceable. Like, when I don't notice the art, I'm always like, it did the job. Like, I read the comic, I read the story just fine. The art carried the story as needed. This was fully elevating.
Yeah, the art was really good.
And to the point where and we're going to get into it, the story for me, I think, almost would have not been as good with not as good art.
Oh, I think the story's piss weak, mate.
Well, yeah, and that's where we're going to get into. But one thing I will save you from, I think, this week is the synopsis, because I think there's so much bollocks. Like, even from a fan of the comic, I'm saying there's so much superhero bollocks coming in and around the story.
So much superhero bollocks.
Exactly. So, to give a brief synopsis, for anyone who's interested in reading this, obviously, I always recommend this comic, especially if you're interested in the Hulk, especially. But the general story is, before this, Bruce Banner was shot and killed by Hawkeye with a special adamantium arrow.
I actually went back and had a look at that just to see.
In Civil War 2, which I have many complaints about.
Well, so I need to clear something up now.
Okay.
So that when I come back to it later, I can come in hot with it.
Okay, sure.
Civil War, right?
2.
So, well, this is what I'm asking about. Which one is the one where Carol Danvers decides that Danvers decides that superheroes have to be super accountable for all their actions and causes a rift in the Avengers?
So that was Civil War 1, and that was Tony Stark, and the whole point of it specifically was to do with superhero registration. So if you were a vigilante superhero, you had to register with the government.
And Tony wanted that?
Yes.
Because when they portrayed it in the MCU, I swear they flipped it, and Tony was all like, "Nah, fuck you guys."
No, MCU, that it was same sides, but they tweaked the core of the argument slightly. So
okay. So what we've done here is defanged a central argument I was going to make later, which is really good because I don't have to deal with it anymore.
That's
great. One thing that this one actually made me do is go and get into some comic book lore.
That's a good sign.
Like, because I fucking needed it. Like,
but again, like I always say, it's valuable to have.
Canada got involved in a big way.
Yeah.
Like, this is like the Ryan and Jamie Comic Literate Podcast Canada edition.
I mean, there's way more Canadian comics. So whenever Canada Day is next, which I assume there is one, we'll do a
100%. I want to hit some Alpha Flight. Like, I've got to know how Canadian Alpha Flight stuff is.
I mean, Alpha Flight is extremely Canadian. So
well, this is the thing, because I've learned about Alpha Flight.
Yes, yeah.
And I know who they are, and I know what they're about. And I'm kind of like, I want to read some Alpha Flight, Ryan. Like, I got to know.
And the mark of a good comic is they want you to read even more.
Oh, fuck off.
So, synopsis, Bruce Banner, the Hulk, was killed in Civil War 2. Because Bruce Banner kind of orchestrated it himself. He was like, I can't trust, I'm not going to Hulk out and, cause some collateral damage, so I need to be taken out. And then it turns out this is the revelation. And actually, this is a key argument for me of an example of using superhero death well. So, going slightly off topic here, superhero deaths happen constantly, right? Every superhero's died at least 5 times, right? And they always come back to life. So that's just an accepted trope of the superhero, especially the Marvel and DC ongoing genres now. The key thing here I found is what's so good is he died, and then his coming back to life has caused an entire shift change in the Hulk character. It's completely refocused the character in a new tone, a new light and everything. And it's this much darker version we see now in this comic. Yeah. And this is prime example of, I think, using a death well. So, like, yes, they're going to come back, but, like, what's the effect of the death? Like, what is the change has happened? The prime example of a bad version of that is another person who died in Civil War 2 was James Rhodes, aka War Machine. And literally the way he came back.
Isn't he Tony Stark's homie that gets... Who he gives a suit to? No, he steals a suit, but he steals a version of the suit.
Different origins, everything's bad.
That only has, like, normal standard guns with bullets on it. And at no point does Tony Stark go, do you want me to just whack some of the current tech on your suit, bruh? He's just using, like, it's the equivalent of, like, giving somebody a Windows 2000 computer.
I mean, good writers have given different reasons for why that is. Like in the MCU, like you point out, he stole it. So Tony's not going to be like, hey, do you want me to upgrade the thing you nicked from me? But it's like a weird kind of depiction of how the US government kind of steals the technology and co-ops it themselves. And obviously they can't make as good a version. So they make this, guns and bullets version, whereas Tony's got all the lasers and stuff.
Yeah.
But so in that, Rhodes gets punched through the chest by Thanos. Great panel. Like, looks fantastic. But
I can think of people I'd rather get punched by. But was he wearing the gauntlet? Because that would be dope.
he might have potentially
to the chest.
Yeah, I mean that's gonna, if anything's gonna do it. He was wearing armor at the time as well, so
yeah,
especially. But he came back because in an Iron Man run soon after that, Iron Man woke up from a coma, which he'd been in since the end of Civil War II. He came back and he was like, "Oh, by the way, I just figured out how to bring Rhodes back from the dead," and everyone's like, "Cool," and then he just brings him back, and then everything's fine again. So that's my contrast of a horrible, like just a piss weak use of a character death.
And the idea that Hulk won't let Banner die is like so bear in mind this is my first Hulk comic.
Yeah,
I've never read any Incredible Hulk. But there's that line that what's his name? Really really good looking actor plays the Hulk.
Which one? Mark Ruffalo?
Mark Ruffalo.
Yeah.
Where Mark Ruffalo's Banner says, "I once tried to shoot myself in the mouth," and then he spat the bullet out.
The other guy, yeah.
Yeah, the other guy. Yeah, and they always they like, I imagine the other guy thing is a consistent trope because that's how they refer to each other in this.
I think it has been since the Avengers. So I'm almost certain that started. I think it was used sporadically before then, but since the Avengers, it's become like an ingrained.
It's almost
aspect.
like a pseudonym that they have for each other.
Yes, exactly, and they always refer to each other as the other guy.
And I like that. I think that's I've completely derailed your synopsis.
No, that's what we're
to have a discussion.
We might as well call it the Comic Literate Tangent Podcast. Like, that is like what we're here for.
So one of the things the thing that I liked about this comic.
Do you want me to finish the synopsis before you?
Nah. Would you like to?
I would just say the main.
I
run
know
of it
the
is,
completionist in you is fucking screaming at you to get this synopsis finished.
I mean, it's like the intro. Like you gotta get it in there somehow. But so basically, Bruce realizes that the Hulk aspect of him is actually bringing him back from the dead, is immortal. But not only that, it's not the Hulk that we're used to. So the normal Hulk is like a begrudging good guy who is a bit animalistic, a bit, simplistic, but ultimately like gets angry, but does the kind of right thing in the end kind of thing. This Hulk is a new, different Hulk. And that's kind of the premise of this whole run.
Perception on this is a little bit different because my understanding of the Hulk was always that we didn't really know what motivated him because he was non-verbal.
He's had varying degrees of verbalness, if that's a word, verboseness. He's had different variations of being able to talk. So it can range from like animalistic grunts and puny Banner to like a little more talking, and then you've had Smart Hulk in the past, where Hulk has had Banner's intelligence somehow, and that kind of stuff. So
whereas what we see here is a very articulate Hulk.
Yes, and not just articulate, but menacing and intelligent, and
and he always says, "Oh, Banner's the science, the other guy's the scientist." What he doesn't say is the other guy's the smart one. Yeah. And there's this reoccurring theme that actually Banner lost a lot of his intelligence when that arrow went through his fucking cerebellum, and that actually the Hulk has come back with more of his intelligence than he has now.
Yeah, and he just specifically describes the intelligence. He says Hulk's not now a nuclear scientist, but he has this intelligence in like intuition. And
yes, he can smell lies.
Yes,
running theme through the whole thing is that the Hulk can smell lies. Right?
Yes, and reading people and all this.
Yeah, and so
this is your verdict on the story.
Yeah,
right.
Everybody, because I read a bunch of reviews of this just as part of my research, and I watched a few videos people talking about it because I didn't like it. Okay. Overall, I didn't think it was that good.
Okay.
And you and everybody else is holding this up as being like one of the great comic books of all time, right?
Yeah. And with the specific caveat that we are comparing it to other superhero comics.
Yeah, this is it. And the thing that everybody said is, it's this amazing examination of good and evil, and Bruce, like there's this incredible examination that Bruce Banner is doing of himself, and it really goes into grey areas in morality. And as far as I could tell, there was like one panel where Bruce was looking in the mirror and kind of observing his own morality relative to Hulk. And then the story just kind of very quickly in issue 2 skipped along into comic book shenanigans. and that wasn't explored or developed
Right.
in any meaningful way.
I think it does get picked up on in bits in later issues.
I mean, how much later?
Well, exactly. But we are only looking at the first 10, 11 issues and judging it based on that. And on that regard, it's and that's almost a year of publication.
Yeah. But everyone was saying there was this great examination of morality, and I was like, where? Show me where it is. It kind of like the relationship between Banner and Hulk feels like a really underdeveloped, essentialized version of the Jekyll and Hyde story.
Yeah, which is a famous like basing the original character on was the Jekyll and Hyde relationship, but in a very more obvious like when he's the bad one is strong and he can beat anyone kind of thing, rather than morality.
Hyde has inhuman strength.
Yeah,
so Hyde is incredibly strong.
Yeah,
and he's twisted and deformed and he's monstrous, but he's very strong. And so I was kind of looking at it and I was thinking, well, there isn't really the thing that everybody says this story is doing. It just wasn't doing for me.
Mm.
And I don't know if that's, again, because I'm used to stuff with a bit more subtlety.
I mean, I would not describe this comic as subtle and to be honest, as a fan of the comic, I wouldn't say that's the thing I would recommend it for, say it's good for. I agree with you that it's not that deep. It doesn't really do any proper examination. What I enjoy about it is it uses those themes to create a tone and vibe. And
it certainly has. It does have a tone. You're right. There is a slight undercurrent theme of horror.
Yeah, and
running through it, and
it dips into that kind of Lovecraft cosmic horror a little bit, like with the whole thing of the green door, and especially when you get to like issue 11, where basically they may or may not have fallen into hell kind of thing. So it touches on things like that. And again, I think that more speaks to like the vibe and tone it's creating rather than making any kind of actual points or statements about morality or ethics or whatever.
Did you see the Milton quote?
Yeah, that's what the quotes at the start of the issues mean.
Yeah, do you know what the...
I definitely read it, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
So there was a quote from John Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost.
Yes.
You know what Paradise Lost is?
I've definitely heard of it, but I can't think of it now.
Description of hell.
Right.
And so, they were very knowingly trying to do that, weren't they? But again, the green door thing, I'm going to be honest, didn't think it was particularly well introduced. Didn't think it was that well utilized. Kind of screamed of superhero shenanigans to me.
So yeah, I 100% think like this has a level of superhero shenanigans. I think it's less than some comics, and I think one thing that really hurts it in terms of as an isolated text is having the Avengers come into it.
Well, yeah. So the Avengers for me in this, firstly, Carol Danvers isn't an Avenger anymore. She's in charge of Alpha Flight.
She's both, I think, in this.
Well, no, because this is the thing. She rocks up with the Avengers.
Yeah, she's in the Avengers at this point.
And then the whole thing didn't make any sense. It kind of struck me as a Deus Ex more characters, which is what I'm going to call that trope now in comic books, which is like, we need something to happen. We can't find an organic way with the characters that we're already using who are non-super to make this thing happen. So what we're going to do is have the Avengers jump Banner. But again, right? The Hulk has the night thing, the fucking werewolf shtick that they've introduced.
Yeah.
Bollocks. Like, awful. Don't know why they did that. They jump him at night, and then he says, "You've made me angry, and it's nighttime." And she said, "We've studied the patterns. We know when Hulk comes out, and he only comes out at night. Why not just jump him in the fucking day, and then you can take him peacefully?"
Yep. I'll give you that 100%.
Like, so they are expecting me to believe that Tony Stark and Carol Danvers, both of whom are highly intelligent people, have identified a pattern that Hulk only comes out at night. They're all friends with Banner. They all have a lot of love for Banner. They desperately want to take him peacefully. So they show up when they know he's going to Hulk out, instead of just showing up in the middle of the day when he, by the new rules of this world, will not Hulk out.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm actually literally skimming through it now just to see if I can find like if there was like a missed explanation or anything for it, just in case. Your core argument there of like why they're doing it at night, like if it is literally that on the surface, then that is bad because you've just explained why 100%. In terms of them suddenly turning up, like things like that, I do feel like that's just the Marvel universe. Is if something big's kicking off, especially a Hulk related thing, the Avengers are the people who are going to turn up and attempt to handle it.
And Banner and Tony Stark are friends, and there's a lot of love there, isn't there? And so I get that, but Tony's instant reaction before they've done any diplomacy is to drop a nuke on the town.
I mean, by that point,
he blows an entire town up just for shits and gigs because he wants to try his new toy out.
At that point, the Hulk is attacking them, right? It's a bit after that they drop the laser nuke.
He's filled Thor in, and then Black Panther's had to go and also got him filled in.
Yeah, and they're finding him very overpowering, and they can't handle it. It's a very interesting point you made. I really want to see, like, is it as bad as you've made it out to be? It's not. Now I have disbelief. But for something that I missed, I'm thinking like, why did I miss it? Or why did it just go over my head?
Yeah.
When I'm like kind of examining it to be like, hey, all this stuff is happening. So I'm at the point now to have a quick scan over. Okay, so as best I could tell, it's not great. This is the weakest thread of a justification
Go for it.
that I can give to her. So Carol Danvers says, yeah, it's the Hulk's night is the Hulk's time, blah blah. But to set the Hulk free, Bruce Banner has to die, and that's just not going to happen. So they seem to be apparently on the idea that it's not just every night the Hulk comes out, but it's that somehow if Bruce dies, then the Hulk brings him back to life at night. And that leads to the reference, and again, I'm not saying it's good, that leads to the reference, it's the Avengers MCU reference, where he's like, but that's my secret captain, implying I'm already dead. So that a very, very few
Weak
lines.
source.
Oh yeah, exactly. So in a very short sentence, I think they're trying to get across that, yeah, but as long as he doesn't die, then we're fine. Now, that obviously does not justify that they couldn't have just found him in the daytime.
Yeah.
And even if they did have to kill him then, they could have like brought him away and stuff. So yeah, I definitely give you that. Like I will count that as a huge plot hole in this.
Yeah,
regard.
massive. And again, a lot of the people I kind of was reading up on were much bigger comic book nerds than either you or I. Maybe definitely more than me. Maybe not more than you. I'm not.
I mean, it's been a while since I've dusted off the credentials, but I haven't got a yard box yet, so they're probably ahead of me. But go on.
But they were saying, oh yeah, I kept seeing these plot holes, and then I did some research, and it turns out it was all canonical, and Al Ewing's did a great job. By all intents and purposes, the general consensus is that Al Ewing's did a really great job of making everything that happened here canonical and making sure that everything had a precedent in older texts and stuff. But that just struck me as bat crap crazy. And then we went straight from there into like just pure shenanigans, and everything that happens thereafter I just don't think was compelling or interesting in terms of story.
Right.
Like that scientist poking a bunch of different Hulk bits in a jar. Creepy, yeah, but not an interesting story beat.
And again, I think that is why what comes down to why my recommendation or of why it's so good was I enjoyed the creepiness and the vibe. I keep going back to it because that's why I was enjoying it when I first read it, compared to every other Hulk story that was like, ooh, woe is me, I'm traveling by myself because the military's after me and I can't speak to the woman I love and her dad is the head of the army who's trying to capture me and use me for like that whole Hulk shtick. So that being like the basis, and then we get to, ooh, the Hulk's like separated into body parts in jars and it's all very creepy. Like that was a refreshing kind of read.
And I can 100% appreciate that this would have been water to a thirsty man.
Yes. I think that one thing you could compliment it is that there is like room and space for a more compelling Hulk story in there.
Yeah.
If it had to be part of the ongoing series. So for all that I've complimented it, it is ultimately the current, like at the time, it was the current ongoing Hulk title. So we're still at a time with all the big events that happen across all the titles. It's still at a time with those. And
this is a wider conversation that I think we've been having over multiple episodes now.
Yeah. And it will keep coming up.
Which is this idea that actually the sense that this stuff has to be popular and has to slot into the wider ongoing story that Marvel are creating around all of these heroes means that interesting stuff can't happen, or when interesting stuff does happen, it happens tonally, but then the story doesn't match the tone. Like, imagine if this was a slasher story where we got to see one criminal getting fucking tortured by the Hulk as vengeance.
Yeah.
If this was Saw but with Hulk, that would have been terrifying and incredible. What we get is a couple of really great moments with some really stunning looking panels kind of draped over a not particularly compelling story.
Yeah.
And that's what bothers me. I think the reason that this is so much more frustrating to me than something like Flashpoint was is that I can 100% see everything that you liked about it and also thought it was cool.
Yeah.
Like the raw idea of framing a horror story with Banner and Hulk as the antagonists, as this malevolent force.
Or even as Hulk as a seeming antagonist, who former hero to an antagonist, and Bruce kind of being caught up in it, like not having a choice in it.
That is a really stellar idea, isn't it? And it just kind of there's moments where a lot of these story beats feel like a big hit and a miss.
Yeah.
Like, we've not gotten into Sasquatch yet.
Yeah, and that's a whole story in itself.
I really like.
And there's the thing about this comic as well is there's so many, even on this level of analysis and critique, there's so many little good parts that I think are worth addressing. But like, I think the fact that they brought in the Avengers so early on, it felt more like a requirement of the universe.
Yes.
So like, if it's going to be set in this universe, and if Hulk's doing Hulk shit, the Avengers are going to have to step in.
They're going to have to turn up at some point. Yeah, I agree.
I think really encompassing what I loved about the genre is this specific title is, I think, the first two issues. I think those in a vacuum, I think, are really good, especially issue 2.
Yeah, I mean, because the reporter, Jackie
McGee.
McGee.
I think it's McGee. I'll double check that.
Do you know about her? Do you know?
No, she's new. She's new character.
She is, but she isn't.
Okay.
There is a reporter in a 1970s Hulk TV show, Jack McGee.
Okay, so kind of a reference to Easter egg kind of thing.
100%. There's this kind of sleuthy reporter in an old Hulk TV show. I think it might have even been the Lou Ferrigno one.
Yeah.
Called Jack McGee, who is constantly like trying to find out more about Hulk and investigate him. So she is a riff on that. She is kind of, and she serves the same function in the story largely.
Yeah.
She's a nod to a previous Hulk character. When I found that out, kind of cool.
Yeah.
Liked her character quite a lot in general.
I really like the reveal of why she's obsessed with the Hulk, because everyone else is kind of like, you don't need to worry about this. Like, this is superhero shit. Like, we could report on it, but you don't need to chase the story. Like, it's out of our league kind of stuff. It's like she's literally from a small town paper, so it's not even like the Daily Planet or something like it, or the Daily Bugle.
She's from an Iowa newspaper, isn't she?
Yeah, exactly. So, but the reveal that what it is, it's one instance where, as a child, the Hulk basically ran through her town, and all the advice. And I like little bits like this. So the whole being part of the wider universe and stuff. I like when they make little things that make sense for everyday people. So the fact that if a Hulk thing happens, they already had
Green Alert.
Yeah, Green Alert, and this inbuilt advice on what to do, which was get away from the area as quick as you can. Don't grab anything. Don't stop for it. It's like a natural disaster.
Yeah.
Get away as soon as possible. But the added little bit of, and don't look the Hulk in the eye.
Yeah.
And and the fact that she does, and it sticks with her, looking at this monster and like the fact that they made eye contact, like literally like imprinted something in her as a child that she just carries with her to this day. So like little bits like that I thought were awesome.
And again, wouldn't that have been amazing as the final beat of a 5-issue run, where we maybe don't even see Hulk? What we see is her sleuthing, and we see the destruction, and we see the kind of the issue where she was interviewing those people. and we see the Hulk through their eyes, right? We
Yeah.
don't actually see Hulk. We don't see that moment in the story happen in real time. We only see it from the differing perspectives of all these people.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Yeah, yeah.
And like,
so I say the first 3 issues,
Yeah.
that are like
a whole
condensed
5-issue run of that, an epistolary
good.
of her traveling and kind of ducking and weaving through all these layers of bureaucracy, people telling her she can't do it, you're mad, you shouldn't be doing this. And she's going through the destruction and this epistolary, and we're just seeing like glimmers of the Hulk, and we're seeing like what he leaves behind. And then finally there's this big moment where she gets to confront the Hulk, and he just walks away from her because she's insignificant to him. That would have been so powerful. Instead, we get Hulk head in a jar and the Avengers dicking about. Like, it just feels like there was so many amazing places this could have gone, and the writers knew that, but they had to shoehorn this stuff in to keep Marvel happy. There's sometimes like the ones where we just read a bad story, and I go, that we both agree that was a poorly told story.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this and I'm like, at different points in this development, I can see that this Al Ewing's guy had some really tremendous ideas that he still manages to weave in. I just want to see more of the bits that were good and more of the characters that were compelling.
Yeah. In rereading this, I kind of realized that my memories of it from when I first read it, not having been back to it until recently, I knew there was a lot of superhero shenanigans in it. Like, once we established the trope of superhero shenanigans, I thought there is quite a bit in it. But what I thought, in memory, incorrectly, was that it happened so later on in the run that I literally, incorrectly, I would have told you that it felt like more of like a getting into a warm bath of superhero shenanigans.
Yeah.
So you don't notice it much, but it slowly builds up, and then like later on in the run, it's very shenanigy, but I thought had built up more in time. And I think the stuff that does happen later is built up slow enough.
What, post issue 10?
Like well after.
Because this is a 50-issue run, isn't it?
Exactly,
This is a huge, sprawling story.
Which I enjoyed up until the end. And I'm not to say that the end was bad, but the end kind of felt like it built up a lot, and then it petered out without paying off enough stuff. But I didn't realize the Avengers coming in. I knew they were in at a point. I didn't realize they were in so early. And that is a detriment to the story they were building. One
thing I did think was cool, just in going back to the art,
I
really liked the character models for the Avengers in this.
Yeah, they're good in that style.
I liked Big Beardy Thor. I liked this iteration of Tony Stark. I thought this iteration of Carol Danvers with the long hair was cool, because when we saw her in flashbacks with her short hair, it kind of gave a nice contrast to current and past Carol Danvers. So there was a lot that I liked about their appearance, but I just don't think it was the natural way for that story to progress. Because when he said, right, I'm going hitchhiking, I'm going home, I was like, fuck, he's going to go on a journey. Like, this is going to be that explorative journey that I really want to see Banner and Hulk go on together in this run.
Yeah.
And then with, he's not even thumbed one lift yet, and the Avengers turn up and he is eviscerated by a nuke and he's in bits in a jar. It just kind of felt as though they were right on the cusp of doing this amazing thing, and then it didn't happen.
Yeah. I did like post being in the jar.
Yeah.
I like the initial shock of that panel reveal, I thought was quite good. Like, when you see what's happened to him, you go, it's a shocking kind of like, oh my God.
And it was a big half page or full page thing, wasn't it?
Yeah. And then once after that, you kind of like, what is he actually going to do?
Yeah.
I did enjoy the realization of the Doctor being like, oh, you actually wanted this to happen. Like, not specifically like, I don't think he was like, they're going to put me in jars. But I think he was like, when he came back to life in the jars, he was like, let's see where this goes, like, for his amusement. And then the breaking free of the clicking one finger.
Yeah, I thought that was cool because it was very Thanos-y.
Yeah, and that's a big thing with the Hulk. Is like he does like thunderclaps, which like big shock waves. So naturally, a single hand snap would break a glass or several glasses.
Can I do a quick lore check with you?
Sure.
The Thanos finger click.
Yep.
Finger click.
Finger snap. Yeah, I was saying click and then snap. Yeah.
Was that in the books, or was that an MCU?
That was original books. Yeah, that was like a big thing in that.
And
run.
This is post Thanos, right?
Yeah. Well, the Thanos snap that happened like in the 70s, 80s kind of era. Yeah.
Oh shit!
Yeah, that's how old that story is. The original Infinity Gauntlet or Infinity Stones run was then. Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was really recent.
No, that's an old one. Yeah. Marvel fans knew as soon as they introduced Thanos, they were like,
That's what was going to happen.
They're going to do the stones, the gauntlet, and the snap.
Cool. Okay, cool. So that gesture has meaning and presence in this world. Like, that's a big deal for him to have used that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't catch on to it like initially, but I think that's because it's such an ingrained thing that almost like goes over my head now.
Yeah, and I get that. I mean, you are more lost in the source than I am.
I'm up to my nuts and guts of the Marvel super shenanigans. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and so I mean, it's challenging because there's a lot that I liked here, but a lot that I just found a bit.
I feel like this comic is a great example of the halfway point between typical over the top superhero shenanigans and nothing properly deeper, interesting, or meaningful at all, and then you're where you come from of like novels and writing that is like deep and full of metaphor and meaning and stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like this is the halfway point where it touches on those things, and as you say, it raises some points where you go, you could go deeper with this, like you go, but it doesn't. So I feel like it feels like that almost like halfway point between the two, almost like a meter to compare others. It's like, if we compare future superhero ones, it's like, is it above or below Immortal Hulk?
Yeah,
like,
is
where
it
does
above
fall
or
on
below
the
Hulk line?
Yeah.
I like that. The Hulk line can be a new... And
specifically the Immortal Hulk line, because normal Hulk is like shenanigans galore. So that's every this is like the highest point the Hulk reaches on the Immortal Hulk scale.
Yeah.
And now we have that to reference to everything else.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We've created a yardstick in this episode. I love this episode has now become canon.
it has to release no matter what.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have a lot of criticisms, but it's tough because there were so many elements I would have liked to have seen explored more, and it would have been really good. Like, really good. And again, I think something that you've touched on, which we've talked about a bunch of times as well, is the fact that sometimes when I come in hot with these opinions about comic books, I have to meet you in the middle when you say, yeah, but it was so bad before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, this represents a shift and a change for this property and this franchise that, as somebody who's maybe been duking it out and buying a fucking Hulk comic to go in their yard box once a month for the past 5 years, and then finally this comes out and they're like, oh my god,
it's good for once. Yeah.
And so I think that's the thing. It's that we have to remember that when these comic books become revered, it is comic book consumers who are rating them and ranking them.
It's like there's a thing. This is like a very weird tangent to compare it to, but there's a thing where there's certain films that get released that have really high review scores, right?
Yeah.
But they're kind of the films like for an example of like a really niche genre, there's a lot of like Christian themed films. So there's like rom-coms and action stuff, but they've all got the undercurrent of like, yeah, but Jesus though.
Yeah.
And those have really high scores because the only people who go see them are the people who are really big into Jesus. So they're like, oh my God, it was like a coherent film and he was Christian. Like, yeah. So I think it's kind of like that a little bit. Yes. Where like comic fans see this stuff first and they go, oh my God, it's great. And then someone else goes, oh, let me check out a comic book. Let's see what all this palaver is about. And they go, it's all right. This is good. I've got problems with it. But...
Yeah, well, this is it, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, so can we talk about Sasquatch?
Yeah, so Sasquatch is a character who has existed before, primarily in his Sasquatch state. Like, he is normally like just Sasquatch all the time, which does play a big part in this story. I only knew him very little in passing, so I haven't read much Alpha Flight, and he's like a prime character in that. Did you also know the short guy in Alpha Flight?
Yeah.
Do you know what his name is?
No.
Puck.
Oh. Really?
Yeah, it's Puck, yeah. For the obvious reference, yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Him and Wolverine are mates because they're both Canadian.
Wait.
Wolverine's Canadian, yeah.
No.
Yeah, Wolverine's Canadian. And Deadpool.
Well, that's only because Ryan Reynolds, though, sure.
No, because it was established well before he was Canadian. And then the part of the magic of like that Ryan Reynolds casting as Deadpool was that he matched the character so much that they were like, he's the only person who can play him. Like, anyone else would be a lesser casting.
And it's funny because he played a really bad iteration of him in a X-Men film, didn't he?
So X-Men Wolverine Origins,
Yeah.
horrific film, but so there's two halves to that portrayal. So he was only in the first half where he was playing pre-Weapon X Wade Wilson.
Yeah.
So he was smart aleck, one-liner, like quippy, like not taking anything serious. And then they gave him these random sword powers where he could like cut bullets in half with his katanas, or what was the shorter ones, the wakasashis, yeah.
But they gave him sword hands. They gave him Wolverine claws that were 2 katanas.
So that second half was such bad writing that Ryan Reynolds didn't do that part. So he's him in the first half, and then when he's brought back at the end,
I could have sworn that was him.
It literally looks so close to him. Like, they got a guy who looks a lot like him, but it's not Ryan Reynolds. Because Ryan Reynolds is like, I can't be asked. I don't want it. That sucks. Like,
you're shitting me. In that scene where he walks up and
he's got his
Logan's
mouth covered.
What have they done to you, Wade? And the swords come out.
Yeah, that's not Ryan Reynolds. Yeah.
No shit, you're shattering.
Yeah, because he was just like, that sucks. Can't be asked. Like, I'm not doing it.
I went and saw that film in the cinema with my dad as a kid. Probably as a like in that kind of part of your life where you don't spend as much time with your parents because you're like 13, 14 years old.
I'm too cool for the hang out with my parents. Yeah.
And it was like one of the first times I'd been to just catch a film with my dad in an evening in a while. So I have a really fond memory of that film.
Yeah.
And I went back and watched it recently and was like, this isn't that
pile of
good.
shit. Pile of garbage. Although, one thing that is really good, and the common consensus I see from a lot of people now, is if the film had just been this, the opening with Wolverine and Sabretooth going through all the major wars.
Yeah.
People are like, that was great. Why didn't you just make the whole film that? Because that would have been awesome.
Watching his brother become slowly more traumatized and unhinged as they went through various wars. And like at the start, they're kind of in the front line together, just duking it out. And by the end, Victor's just brutalizing people. And Logan's like, what the fuck are you doing? Really cool, right?
And also the concept of two guys with healing factors in every war.
Yeah.
So like getting like shot by muskets and stuff and surviving things. She's got like cannons and stuff. And then later like machine guns and stuff. Like, yeah. And the fact that they just always found themselves in wars. Also, great film. Better film, the second Wolverine film, just called The Wolverine, set in Japan. Opening bit with him getting hit with the fucking nuke.
Yeah.
And healing from it was so awesome as well. Bit of a damp squib ending to that film, but over like him fighting on top of the bullet train was like really awesome as well.
I like what's his face as Wolverine.
Hugh Jackman, yeah. He's the definitive Wolverine.
To the extent that I don't know it, because have MCU managed to snag the rights from that?
They
Sony?
own all the Fox rights, so that's X-Men and Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
They haven't done anything with them yet, except for, spoilers for Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, if you haven't seen that yet. They did Reed Richards as played by John Krasinski, who was a big fan casting for it. People were like, he'd be great at it. And I think he's at the point I was a bit too old, and especially to sign up for like 10 years of films and stuff. So they were like, look, it's an alternate universe. He's Reed Richards there. It's going to be someone else when we do it in the normal universe.
Well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so going back to Sasquatch. So I've wanted to talk to him for like 20 minutes now and we keep getting off topic.
Yes.
I liked his character.
Yeah, he was a bit like cocky jock scientist.
Yeah, and it's kind of like you can reasonably see how, like Banner goes over to Canada. No, he comes over to America. No, yeah. Banner goes over to his university, doesn't he?
They are at the same university at some point.
Banner goes to his university because they've got a great gamma lab.
In their younger days.
Yeah, and they meet and they're roommates, and Banner gets really frustrated because, like, you're super athletic and people already like you. Science is my thing. Leave it alone. And then he's like, well, yeah, I'm on a football scholarship, but I'm on a scholarship. I'm also a student. Like, I like to learn. I want to know things. Teach me. That's
one thing I've found, having read several Hulk comics, is Bruce Banner is written best when he's extremely flawed.
Well, because he has to be. And I feel like Mark Ruffalo's Bruce Banner in the MCU is a little bit too thoughtful and a little bit too perfect.
So, to be fair, the reason for that, which kind of makes sense, is he's already an established Hulk.
Yeah.
So the whole experience of becoming the Hulk and dealing with that does build character and makes him better off.
Yeah, but every Hulk's an established Hulk, aren't they?
Well, you've got the original Eric Banner portrayal. Literally, a guy named Banner played Banner.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was Ang Lee's Hulk, which was really weird. Like, went too far into the. Have you seen Ang Lee's Hulk?
No.
I'd be interested to get your take on it, because I think
which was the one that Sony did pre.
That was
Ruffalo.
Fox or Paramount, whoever, and that was Edward Norton playing.
Yeah, he was all right at it.
Yeah, he had just turned Hulk, so he was kind of dealing with it and was still a bit, little bit of the arrogance, a little bit of the, but it was a different kind of thing. But he's written best when he's extremely flawed, because he did have a pretty horrible upbringing.
Well,
like, canonically.
we get into the daddy issues in this one a bit, don't we?
Exactly. The Ang Lee's Hulk, they like went a bit too far into it, and they went a bit too like faux deepness and meaning, and I think they lost the way quite a bit, and it got a little boring. The one plus side of that is there's the Stuart Lee joke, because Stuart Lee is a massive Hulk fan.
Is he?
He loves the Hulk. Yeah, he's big into it. There's a bit where he's talking about it. He got to interview Ang Lee, and
I know the bit.
Yeah, and he's like, because you're Ang Lee, or don't make you Ang Lee. You won't like me when I'm Ang Lee. And he's like, well, what do you mean by that? And he's like, it's a pun. It's a pun on the name. And he's like, apparently Ang Lee was not a fan of it.
Yeah.
But that one was a bit of a weird one. But written best when he's extremely flawed, and you can see him grappling with the Hulk becoming a representation of his worst side.
Which is definitely one of the things that I found most compelling here.
Yeah, and that's when it's Hulk's normally is written best, is when it plays into the psychology of a fractured mind. So, like, there was this Hulk aspect, like, just, unbridled anger in Banner before the accident, and the whole Gamma thing, like, the established Gamma stuff in this universe... It gets to a point where it gives you powers, but it unlocks something else. So there's another part that brings over. Because, like, She-Hulk, famous Hulk, she didn't have any of the kind of psycho stuff, but that's because hers is so different from, Bruce Banner Hulk.
In early She-Hulk runs, there's no drawback to her being Hulk, and she's a lawyer, isn't she? And she'll turn up and, like, in court as Hulk in a nice suit.
Yeah.
And like she's less monstrous and animalistic, but here they made her look quite monstrous and animalistic, just like Hulk.
So there's a specific reason for that. So after Civil War 2, so that's a heavy shadow, that comic, over this title and everything happened after. But so she actually had a bit of a PTSD episode following not only her cousin being killed, but also at the time she was seeing Rhodey. Like, Rhodey was her partner. Okay. And those deaths put her into this kind of trauma spiral. And she had this run, which was all about her dealing with this, but also her Hulk side becoming more like Banner's Hulk.
Yeah.
Because she had all this grief and trauma that was taking form of her Hulk self, or her Hulk side.
Oh, so it plays into existing ideas that we already have for Banner's Hulk.
Yeah, but it linked it specifically to like trauma, fresh trauma that just happened, rather than childhood trauma of Bruce Banner.
That's kind of cool.
That was a great run. If I recommend, if anyone wants to check it out, She-Hulk from, I don't remember what year it was, but it was post Civil War 2.
Yeah, that's actually a cool concept, isn't it?
Yeah, and then soon after she just reverted back, and she's now back to normal She-Hulk. And I tried it for 5 issues. I was like, I can't. This is boring. I can't get on board.
So,
Sasquatch. Yes.
Liked his character, did not like the way he was utilised. So the whole shtick in the hospital where he dies on the table, comes back as Sasquatch, green door opens, Banner's dad gets in and is in control of Sasquatch now.
Yes.
It just kind of felt as though they brought in Sasquatch as a logical antagonist for him, in terms of a physical antagonist for him, and then kind of at some point in the development went, well, we've got this more psychological Hulk now, who is kind of, chastising and torturing people as he's going about his business. We need to find a way that Sasquatch can match him on that level. Let's just photocopy his dad's brain into Sasquatch.
Well, so it builds into this thing that happens, like, as you saw, it was building up to this Banner's dad from hell coming through this green door, and that becoming like a running thing post this. So that was the introduction of the character. I did like, I think the use of that character, the Sasquatch character, and whoever the real guy's name is, it showed like a dichotomy between him and Banner, like how they both reach these points independently, and like how they parallel each other, but also mirror to like opposite ways as well. So I think it was used well in that regard. But as you say, it definitely was a very obvious point of, and we need a big fight.
Which they could have done with Iron Man in the Hulkbuster suit. Like, they had opportunities to do that. It kind of felt like, again, they got to a point quite early on where they started taking the standard comic book throw enough shit at a wall approach.
Yeah, but I do think at the very least they obviously wanted to introduce the Hulk's Banner's dad coming back from the dead kind of aspect.
Yeah, and I get it as a story beat, I do.
And I liked that realization when he realizes that that's what's happened, and it's the first time you see fear on Hulk's face.
Yes.
That would have been better if we had sinister Hulk for longer.
Yeah.
It would have hit much harder, that fear on his face realization. That would have hit a lot harder if we'd seen him like fearless and evil for a longer run, whereas this made him sympathetic, I think, too quickly.
Yeah, because I suppose, and this is the thing where I'm maybe at a loss, because I don't know as much about it as you do. Because my perception of the Hulk was always that he was kind of a dick. Like, he was just a loose cannon. He would just destroy everything in his path, regardless of whether it was friend, foe, or civilian. And so I suppose, actually, now that I say that, the idea that this Hulk is outwardly sinister is the difference, isn't it? He's not just an unstoppable force. He is now a sharp instrument.
Yep. And I think that is best exemplified by in that first issue, when he picks off the biker gang one by one.
That's so cool, isn't it?
Great pie, yeah.
Yeah. No, everything that happens in those first couple issues is really enjoyable and like super psychological. And then, you know, I mean, I think that's where I kind of had the idea that this was going to be a real exploration of morality, because that guy like shot a child.
Yeah.
But he was doing it because he was in deep with this biker gang and had a family that he needed to support. And then you turn up to the hospital after the Hulk's ruined him, and his wife and his daughter are there, and they don't know that he's murdered a fucking child in cold blood. And you're like, wow, that's potent, right?
And I like the fact that they made him sympathetic, because it too easily could have been typical mugging, you know, shop robbery, and the guy's like, fuck you, I just need the money anyway, kind of thing. Like, and Hulk could have then he could have then been scared when the Hulk turned up. The fact that he was already traumatized from his own actions before the Hulk even turns up, I thought was a nice added wrinkle that made it a bit more complex than it, for me, again, compared to typical comic books.
Yeah.
It was a little deeper in that regard.
And again, I completely agree with you, because I think there's this sense in comic books sometimes that evil people do evil things because they're evil.
Yeah.
And what you realize is that evil isn't, like, true evil doesn't really exist. People have motives and complex socioeconomic reasons for doing the things they're doing, and actually it's about the point at which you start to do bad things is the point that your morality meets your needs, right? Like the point at which your needs outweigh the morality of a situation, and you go, well, I have to just do this thing now. And that was a really great portrayal of that without needing to explain it too much to me.
Yeah.
Like, what I was seeing there told me everything I needed to see. And again, like, if I'd have gotten 10 issues of that, I could have watched that same story play out over 10 issues and come away completely satiated and happy.
Yeah, if it had been those first 3 issues that stretched out for longer, it definitely would have been better, in my opinion. And they could have done all this stuff further on, and it would have felt more earned.
Yeah.
Like, you've held off on this stuff, and now you get to do the shenanigans, because we are more
invested
in the story and the characters, for sure.
Sasquatch.
Yeah, back to I mean, have we touched on the Sasquatch enough? Or
well, I mean, he's a prominent figure in those last 5 issues, isn't he?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I think again, he's the point at which a lot of the comic book shenanigans come in. So Hulk absorbing all of his power through the gamma stuff. I don't know if that's a Hulk thing.
It's been done enough times that it's established.
Because I kind of saw it and went, ugh.
Yeah.
But again, if that's a convention of the story, then cool. They've taken something and used it in this kind of interesting way, because I think through nerfing that guy's character and taking Sasquatch away from him, then there's that moment where Carol Danvers says, well, actually, you're a great gamma scientist. And so you're useful to me beyond your ability to turn into Sasquatch. And so it kind of makes sense. But again, I think the thing that the plot hole that I found the most difficult to
reconcile,
was the fact that the Avengers went and killed Hulk without the forethought that they wouldn't be allowed to keep Hulk afterwards. They knew he was going to go to that Ross guy. They knew that they knew that guy was a malevolent force, and they just kind of did it anyway. And then Carol Danvers was there with them when they did that. And then as soon as she hands Hulk over to the person she knew she'd have to hand him over to, she then says, right, we need to get Hulk back. And you're like, why did you do any of the things you just did then?
Yeah, that definitely comes off as contrived. And I think they almost touched upon a interesting point of like government oversight and like black site, like, was it like government special ops stuff happening, like deep state, that kind of stuff. And they only touched on it for such a tiny moment, and then they brushed past it. I was like, that could have been a little. Well, I would have liked to see like Captain Marvel kind of going to these points of the government, being like, "Where's Banner's body gone? Like, what's happening?" And then go like, "Oh, that's past your clearance." She's like, "I'm a fucking Avenger." Like, what are you on about?
Bureaucracy isn't sexy, but again, it's like the Marvel universe deep. Like, there's a bunch of pockets in the Marvel universe where they want to introduce this concept of the civilian government with all of its tech being at odds with the supers. And I think The Incredibles is a great indication of the fact that that's a really compelling idea.
Yeah, definitely.
In super stories. And then they kind of hint at it and then don't explore it. And you're like, well, why? Either give me a world where this is a relevant issue that we really need to explore, or give me a world without those limitations. I'm happy with either of those two options. What we get, again, is
trying to be a bit of both.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, you can't do both.
I think, pure speculation on my part, my suspicion is it was possibly the writer trying to make the best of a forced situation.
100%. Again, the general consensus that I've seen from other people who've reviewed this comic book online, who know a lot more about this stuff than I do, is that Al Ewing is a really great writer who's done a really good job here with what he had to work with. And again, the fact that we are both coming up with all these really interesting little story beats and fun characters and kind of themes that we saw explored that we thought were interesting is an indication of how good a job he did. It's just, I wish there was more.
Despite the limitations,
Yeah, absolutely. I just wish there was kind of...
I think that the best like example of his work was the isolated issues in the first three.
They were brilliant, weren't they?
I really liked issue 2. I thought like that kind of really is a good representation of what the whole series could have been. So issue 2 is there's a story about basically there's these mysterious deaths happening in the small town, and
Professor Fry. Yeah.
And I love that I love the Hulk being like this like niggling feeling in the back of Banner's head where he's like, something's going on here, and like leading him towards where it is, because that's the issue where he says Hulk is smart in intuition and reading people and seeing where the real shit is happening. And then they find that this kid who died and his dad's missing, the kid's grave is emitting gamma radiation. And then it basically turns out that the dad experimented with gamma to make himself live longer and stronger, and he gave it to his son, and then his son died.
Because he didn't have the long-term exposure.
Yeah.
Again, though, interesting, and I really liked that story beat. I liked that little subplot. But there was a little plot hole in there that just got to me, which is the whole thing was an exploration of the idea of the walking ghost.
Yeah.
Which is a genuine thing in radiation sickness.
Yeah.
So you will be exposed, and there will be a period where you are a walking ghost. You are terminal. You are going to die, but you feel fine, right?
Yeah.
And that's a terrifying thought. And it kind of feels like that's the state that Banner's in, and it's a really lovely exploration of Banner's mental state living with this very potent, insidious Hulk.
The fact that he almost dies every night.
Yeah. The kid doesn't have a walking ghost face, just pukes green and dies.
So do you mean yeah, and I think but the focus on that is on the dad.
Yeah, I
know. The kid is like a plot point to the dad.
I know, but they've created this logical. They've created this consistent logic of the way these things work. And then the key and core example that we're given of it doesn't work that way anymore.
I think so. Of the dad, I think it still works, and I think the son is just a plot point. And I get what you mean, like they could have done it with him as well, but I felt like it was more of a focus on the dad and his story, because especially what happens to him. So the Hulk finds him, Brute Banner finds him in a cave, and the art of Fry when he first appeared, I love that panel. One thing that, again, like quick tangent, one thing I think was great in this, the comic literate secret source of panel layout. What this did really well was having those big reveal panels.
Yeah.
So turn a page, big, scary, creepy looking monster kind of thing. Looking directly into your soul.
In the 11 issues I read, there was only one stinker of a panel.
Really? Yeah.
Which was like 9/10 of a panel. So it was a straight thirds down, and then on the top third, 9/10 of it left to right was one thing, and there was a tiny little bit of conversation that happened in a separate panel.
I think I know it's the same thing.
Yeah. And I saw it and went, "Oh, you're doing such a great job." Because the panel layout was really good, wasn't it? And again, I think when you're dealing with a character as vast as Hulk, sometimes giving us that bit of space and that bit of breath to look at him on a full page spread is really cool. Because squeezing him into those little panels means that everything else has to be tiny, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Just in terms of perspective and the logistics of drawing something that big in amongst other things in a small space. And so the way they laid it out really helped me get a sense of the vastness, not only of Hulk physically, but his potency.
Yeah. And then with these other monsters that appear, having him, Fry, like directly staring at the reader in his first reveal. Especially with that issue 2, there's 2 points I loved. One was the metaphor for like grief as a sickness. So literally this grave of the son. And this is what I mean. I like that the son, how he is used as a plot point rather than the character. So I wasn't that bothered that he didn't get that metaphor of the walking sickness, walking dead syndrome, whatever. People who go to the cemetery where he's buried, even if they're going to see other loved ones, they're getting radiation sickness. So people are grieving their loved ones and then dying from the grief, as like grief spreading as a disease. The other thing was Fry's what happens to him. So Hulk basically buries him in the cave without his arms or legs to live forever in darkness.
And he begs for that sweet release of death. And
exactly.
Like, fuck, that's powerful.
And the fact that was the thing that he was experimenting with Gamma in the first place.
Yeah, to become immortal.
Yeah.
It was cool. Again, those first couple of issues were really laden with metaphor. I want to go back to the thing you just said about the idea of like grief as a sickness, because that is a theme in like, Victorian poetry that's really prevalent because of tuberculosis.
Right.
So you would care for somebody with tuberculosis for years, and then by proximity, you would end up with TB yourself. They called it consumption. And when you went consumptive, it was quite a slow disease. And so you would then be bereft and also suffering from the consumption yourself. And that's like, you can see how poets got hold of that idea, particularly consumptive poets like John Keats, would get hold of that idea and it would become this prevalent metaphor.
And particularly Red Dead 2. Big example in that.
Is there a lot of TB in Red Dead 2?
So, I mean, spoilers for the game that came out, I think, over 5 years ago. The main character, you play as that, who you grow. It's great storytelling in that Rockstar game.
I've heard really good things about it.
Makes you really care about the character. He's a bad guy, but he's, he's like rethinking his morality and everything and what he's doing and the reasons he's doing these bad things. At one point, he beats up someone for protection money or like to repay a loan or something. Poor farmer with his family, like
consumptive.
He beats the shit out of the guy. He's like, pay us on time kind of thing. And it turns out in that beating, he caught TB from that guy. So his negative actions signed his death. Yeah. And you don't realize until way later in the game. So you are like loving this character. He's on a good turn. Like he's trying to make the best. He wants to turn things around and then realizes that he's going to die very soon.
Do you know there are parts of the world where TB is still a death sentence for a lot of people?
I mean, I didn't know, but if you say any disease is still a death sentence in certain parts of the world, it's always a depressing. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, Sierra Leone, the access to healthcare there is so bad And still, if you contract TB, can still be a death sentence.
Well, that's a downer, but
Should we cut that out of the episode?
Nah, no,
Should we cut the TB stuff out?
No, I think it's still an important. I think it's still an important enough thing to leave in.
Okay,
but back to our privileged discussing of fake gamma sickness and all that.
Yeah.
I think we've touched on like the best of the first couple of issues, the problems that kind of go in the later, the shenanigans and everything. Is it a comic that you would keep reading?
So this is the thing, and this is where it's complicated. I didn't necessarily like all that I read, but I probably will dip back in and out of it. Is it still is the run still going? Or
No,
is
this finished. I think there's only 50 issues. It went on maybe 5 years, or 4 years. I think it only ended like last year.
Yeah. 100% I would keep reading. Would also recommend it.
That's good.
I would also like. I give the caveat that I wouldn't recommend it to just anybody. But if there was somebody who was comic curious, who had maybe read a little bit of superhero stuff, had dabbled in it, my recommendation would be this is at the better end of the scale of comic books in terms of artwork doing the heavy lifting for story. Do you know what I mean? Like if you want a good example of a really well-drawn Marvel comic that has some interesting themes, even though they're not explored as thoroughly as I'd like them to be, it's a well-drawn comic with some strong themes and some fun action.
Yeah. And again, the art is hand in hand with the story.
Great. Yeah, the art is doing so much heavy lifting here. And again, I always prattle on about I want the art to be doing some of the heavy lifting in storytelling. And so I definitely feel duty bound to say that in this instance, it really is.
And there's a lot of little specific points that I made notes on, like the transformation art.
Yeah.
It looks like The Thing, like John Carpenter's The Thing, like, and it's meant to be just the normal, like, he's just transforming Hulk to thing. And before, I think people always think of like MCU, but also even back to the Lou Ferrigno, he would get a bit green, he'd bust out of his clothes, and then his trousers would somehow still be on him. This made it very much like a gory effects, like a whirlwind of flesh and bone, and then he's like the other thing.
Yeah, he's the other guy.
Yeah. Again, I made a lot of smaller notes, which I thought were just fun little like caveats, like the introduction of the green door thing.
Yeah.
That I liked it, and I completely get why others don't. Like, that's fair enough. But what I thought of was I love how it's still being mentioned in Marvel today, specifically when we covered Amazing Spider-Man. The character, I can't remember his name, but it was the character who was several people in one.
Yeah.
And he is gamma based, and he's like, didn't you die? And he's like, oh no, I came back. There was a green door. So like that little thing is now like an established thing that appears in other comics now.
So again, I think this is something that's worthy of being talked about, is that as a Marvel comic book writer, sometimes in the back of your head is the idea that if I bring in a cool, like a useful story beat, that
like
others
a concept.
If I bring in a cool core concept here, that could be my lasting legacy in comic books. So like, you know, if the Green Door has now become a thing, Al Ewings will be remembered as the guy who created the Green Door. Yeah. And that's something that's now being used in Marvel Comics and it's spilling out into other bits of the universe. And so it's kind of one of the drawbacks, I suppose, of existing in this larger universe, is that anything I write, if it's cool enough or it's useful enough to other writers, can become a precedent.
Well, this is my issue, like, kind of a large issue with canon and everything in like Marvel and DC.
Well, I mean, that's for much more.
But what happens is, like, you get like these soft or hard resets of the universes every once in a while, and the general consensus is if something is cool or liked or enjoyed, then it's kept on, and the stuff that's not is just forgotten about.
Yeah.
And maybe years later, some great writer will come along and be like, you remember that thing that no one cares about that happened like 10 years ago? I'm going to do like a whole thing about it. And it's like, oh my God, you made it cool again or something. But with this, like Marvel and DC especially, when you have people talking about like, there's like death battle things on YouTube where they're two characters fight. It's like, how powerful is this character? Like Hulk's obviously a prime one for that.
Yeah,
they'll always use the most extreme single mentions of like a high power level of something. They go, well, obviously this character win because in this one issue, but in 20 years ago, he destroyed the universe, so he's the most powerful. And I'm kind of the thing of like, yeah, they technically did that, but it kind of sucks, so I don't count it as part of the character, if that makes sense.
And again, it's what we're dealing with here is something that fits into a wider universe and has to fit into a wider universe. I would be really interested, because one of the things that we've not really done yet is gone back to some proper vintage comics. Like we've kind of stuck to modern stuff, and I get why we've done that. And I think it's really. We
want to be at the edge of the conversation. The trendsetters.
100%. Like I feel like we want to be talking about stuff that's at least culturally relevant right now.
I think it also helps that if people are listening, they're like, "Hey, I might want to get into comics, or it's kind of comics." We'd be like, "This one's out now, or recently. Check this out."
Yeah, like you can still go and pick copies of this up in a used comic book store, and you can go through some yard boxes and pick up a first few issues or whatever.
Yeah,
but I would be really interested to see what comics were like when they weren't as back in the day, when they weren't as bound to their own lore. And I know they're campy and kitschy. Like I've read Action Comics #1 with the first appearance of Superman, and I've read some of the John Romita's senior Spider-Man stuff. I know he wasn't the writer. Forget who the writer was now, but the stuff that John Romita Senior drew in the 60s for Spider-Man, I've read some of that and found it quite good, even though it was quite camp and kitschy. Because I feel like we're in a kind of era now with comic books where even if the fans aren't demanding it, what the publishers are insisting on is this big interconnectedness between all the heroes in their universe.
See, I'm kind of on two minds, because on the one hand, I do like the big shared universe. Like it feels like you can, when you're reading one title and it connects to something bigger or something else happening, you feel like a part of this universe. Like you're seeing this all these different aspects. On the other hand, I recognize, like in this, how it can negatively impact the story of or what some writers are trying to do. So I'm really on the fence. Like I see both sides. Like,
yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't have a strong opinion on what I think the actual sum total of it is. Do you know what I mean? I'm not on either. I'm right there with you on the fence.
Yeah.
Like I think the idea of this big, wider story that's always happening and always changing, and every kind of comic book being influenced by everything else that's happening elsewhere in it is interesting, and I think it's cool, but also there needs to be some isolation so that these characters can feel big and important and powerful in their own stories. And definitely I think the thing that it's done is kind of taken away some of the lower level heroes or made them escalate into being like Spider-Man was a lower level hero to start with. He was
a street hero, yeah.
Yeah, he was your local Spider-Man. Luke Cage, I think, was kind of the same.
Yep. Heroes for hire, him and Iron Fist, literally street heroes. Daredevil, Jessica Jones, yeah.
Even to a certain degree, Deadpool. He was a merc.
Yeah, he's a bit more like a bit of fantastical, like big bombastic fighting and stuff.
Yeah.
He more easily slots into the...
Yeah, and so I think it's kind of eroded some of that end of the market a little bit. And... yeah, I mean, what we're seeing now is that everything has to slot into. There's no isolation. I would really love to see maybe like a run of Hulk or Spider-Man where they are labouring under the impression that they're the first person that this has happened to.
Well, that would be an inevitable universe reset. So when that happens, we might be able to go back into that.
And then maybe the Avengers can turn up right at the end or something. And like that moment.
I mean, that was part of the appeal of when they started the Ultimate Universe. Yeah. So that was all the heroes having their origins again and all starting from scratch again.
And again, I'm just spitballing here. Like I think it's kind of interesting to think about the wider context that these stories are happening within their universes, because we have to. Like they're all slotting into this big wider thing, aren't they?
Yeah. I'll give you prime examples, and I refer to these
do it.
Good and bad examples of that wider universe and affecting all the other characters. So, and in two comics, Civil War 1 and Civil War 2. So Civil War 1 was about the Superhero Registration Act, right?
Which I believe I read at your request when we were younger.
Potentially, yeah. I read it around the time we were working together, and I was catching up all these like big old comics. Civil War 1 I really enjoyed, and what I especially like about it affecting the universe was because it was a necessary thing that every other character had to have an interaction on.
Yeah.
Every superhero had to either be registered or you were an outlaw. So every superhero had to fall on one side or the other. And it became also a philosophical debate that every superhero had to address in some way. If there was any superhero who was like, I'm not getting into that, it's it's like people today, it's like, I'm not into politics. It's like, fucking politics is into you, whether you like it or not. Like, it's happening. So what I found was like every superhero having to have a say on it and interaction with this wider thing that's happening across the entire Marvel universe, except for like space and shit, obviously. I don't think the Guardians of the Galaxy didn't give a shit about it. But that I liked because it was a necessary thing to happen. And prime example of that, one comic I was reading at the time, or not even at the time, I went back and read, and I saw when it coincided. I was reading the Deadpool Cable run, so it's like it was a dual run, Deadpool and Cable from X-Men.
Yeah.
And they fell either side of the debate. So Deadpool was actually pro-registration.
Really?
Yeah, and that was the intention was it to be surprising. And the reason he said I'm an insane person who's running around killing people. Like, I will do that because that's who I am. But I should be fucking monitored.
I need some oversight.
Yeah, like people should be making sure that I don't do what I do. Like, feel like on a grander scale. Whereas the character Cable, he's a time traveler, and he literally at one point speaks to the present, very shenanigans way.
Yeah.
He speaks to the present, but he says, "I know where this goes. Like, I've seen the future. I know where the registration goes. I know that one day you're going to introduce a superpower, like registration, like." Monitoring a certain class of humanity kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the president's like, how do you know about that? Like, we haven't done that yet. And he's like,
because I have
from
superpowers.
The fucking future, mate.
Yeah.
But so that I found was interesting, and I really enjoyed that. Civil War 2 was about a mutant who could see the future, and it was Minority Report, essentially. Should they punish people for crimes they haven't committed yet?
Yeah.
And that
no,
they did the same thing where every superhero title, every Marvel title had to have an opinion on it.
Yeah,
and it felt so forced. It was like Deadpool and someone being like, "What do you think about precognitive and predetermination and all that?" I was like, "Why are you talking about this? Like, it literally doesn't matter."
Swords and shoot guns.
Yeah, it literally doesn't matter. So those are my prime good and bad examples of when it could be good and when not. But come back to this. Another little thing I liked that the title was at the end of the issue, and it became like it was like this big thing has just happened to get you to buy the next issue, and then this like big like black text of the title and like this ominous feeling of like, oh my god, what's just happened? And then you see almost like credits roll at the end of a horror film.
Yeah, no, do you know what? I didn't clock it, but now that you say it, it was quite cool.
And as everything else I picked on was just kind of little points, which, like, again, it doesn't speak to necessarily the grander themes we've discussed. I like the shading and the color use. We talk about the art and the penciling.
Art looked great, didn't it?
But the specific color use, I think the muted colors always had like an ominous doom tone to it and everything. But beyond that, I think we've pretty much covered everything on this. And now we get to the reason that we actually touched on the Immortal Hulk in the first place is just to coincide with the recent release of the Immortal Thor series, which just had one issue come out by Ewing again. So he's continuing the Immortal brand, I guess, for
a brand within a brand, baby.
Brand within Marvel's modern media's brands within brands within brands.
Well, yeah, because
it's brands all the way down.
Marvel. Oh no! Yeah, it's a brand within a brand within a brand that's kind of about 8 different brands at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, but at least this brand's kind of cool, like as opposed to all other brands on top of it.
Yeah, well, this is.
I'm a Marvel fan, and I wouldn't even say I wouldn't describe Marvel as cool. Like,
no, you know when people like cite their interests as Marvel. Huge turn off.
I mean, for me, I'm like, well, we have some space to talk about. Either they're on the similar level to me, or they're like a fan of the MCU films, and I can maybe add a little bit more, like, oh, there was this because of this cool thing. Like, oh, how cool.
It's interesting because people will tell me they like Marvel, and they will find out that I have a comic book podcast, and they'll talk to me about Marvel for a bit, and I will come across as really knowledgeable. Because, of course, I've had to become relatively knowledgeable about it. And then I go, by the way, I detest this shit. I subscribe to the Alan Moore view.
And they're like, who?
And then I'm like, right, deep comic book nerd shit. Alan Moore, one of the greats, thinks you're a man-child. And then they punch me. And then,
despite your actual gender, or whatever you identify with, man-child is just the term.
No, gender is irrelevant
term.
here.
Yeah. But so, yes, Thor, Immortal Thor #1, written by Al Ewing.
Pretty good.
And interestingly, different penciler or artist this time in Martin Coccolo. So it looked, I mean, for me, it was very similar to all previous Thor comics I've read. You've not read any Thor comics?
Not really, but I liked the way that Thor looked. He looked cool.
He did look cool. It was kind of a throwback classic and incorporating it into a more modern style comic. Yeah. But he had the winged helmet as well, which you don't often see him with these days. So that was an interesting bring back. Al Ewing does seem to be very keen on, like, I like this thing from when I read comics as a kid, so I'm bringing it back.
100% though. Love the winged helmet. I mean, I literally have a tattoo of Tyr on my arm with a winged helmet. That shit looks cool.
Is that an inconsistency in the Marvel Norse mythology?
No, the winged helmets are a thing.
But as in specifically Thor?
Yeah, Thor wouldn't have worn a helmet.
I'm surprised you didn't immediately go, well, this is unreadable now.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. Thor, is not, as most people would imagine, the god of war.
Right.
He was the patron god of farmers. He was patronized by farmers. You know, he was very good at fighting, but that was because he was a representation of the proletariat.
Right.
Who, Norse, Viking proletariat, very good fighters. But actually, he was a rain god and a thunder god. And so you prayed to him for rain and bountiful harvests. We're getting off topic.
Well, all I was going to say was I was going to do a quick reverse plug and say, and if you'd like to hear more about Jamie talking about Norse mythology, check out our original Thor subject episode.
Oh yeah,
from very early on, which really covers the whole gambit. And before we quite knew what we were doing when it comes to podcasting.
Oh yeah, that'll be a real fun listen.
It might be a tough one, but if you're really into Norse mythology, it's well worth it. I learned like at least one thing. I can't recall it now, but I definitely learned it at the time.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
But no, I thought the art was really pretty. I think Al Ewing has a great eye for artists.
To match the tone, especially because it's wildly different tone from Immortal Hulk.
Yeah, well, it would need to be, wouldn't it?
I mean, so
you can't have a horror story with Thor at the center of it, can you?
Here's my kind of take. I went into it slightly surprised that I didn't expect the horror theme. I was hoping for maybe a little more of a darker tone, and which
is not what you got.
No, and it's not to say I didn't enjoy it, but when you have something in your mind that you don't realize until it's broken or confronted, you go, oh, well, actually, I did have this preconceived notion, and I thought the Immortal banner, for lack of a better term, would be a kind of darker interpretation. So seeing this, I go, okay, it's not darker, it's more Al Ewing's a bit more writing style. Doesn't necessarily mean darker.
Yeah.
But there were dark parts in it, so maybe that's where it's coming through.
And again, we've had an issue. Like, really, we can make assessments about the story in that one issue and how it's setting things up, what the art looked like, and what the tone was like. And based on those things, it's, again, really crap. And I know we beat this drum a lot these days, but the panel layout was really good.
Yep. I think that's something Al Ewing does seem to be continuing, unless he's just picking good artists with good, who we don't know who does the panel layout.
Well, because this is the thing. I have friends who work in publishing, right? And layouts and typesetting are a whole different job to the graphic design. Like, there will be a person whose job it is when they do these kind of publications. And these are huge publications. Like, these comic books are publications on the scale that you pretty much don't really see anywhere else. There will be a guy whose job it is to lay those panels out. Like, that will be somebody's job. And whomever did it on this issue did a really good job.
But the thing we don't know is because there's no... They credit I've forgotten the term now, but it was like writing out letterer. Yeah. They're crediting letterers, but they're not crediting page layoutists or whatever the term would be. So you can only assume that someone who's been credited has done the page layouts. Yeah. And again, I've seen some comic scripts that either the writer lay out the page, the panels and everything, and then would write in it, like, this is where this happens. Maybe they'll put like a little note, like what kind of like camera shot, for lack of a better term, it would be. And they've gone that in depth. And I've seen other comic book scripts where they say, this page, this, and this happens. Yeah. This page, this, and this happens. And then the artist goes, right, how do I lay out what they've told me to put in this page?
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, it's one of those mystery things. We're going to need some creators like on to actually like give us a bit more in depth.
Do we need a creative consultant? Do we need a comic book consultant? Like, we need to get an insider on.
I think we need someone to make their way all the way to Norwich.
And I don't think when we finally get Alan Moore on, he'll want to talk about that kind of stuff. Maybe he will. Maybe he'll be like, oh my God, these guys are nerdy enough that this is what they care about. And he'll give us like a blow by blow of like From Hell or something and how he laid it out. And that would be like the most exciting day for me.
As long as we don't mention any of the adaptations, except for the Justice League Superman adaptation, then we should be fine.
Cool.
But yeah, there was little things I noticed immediately of the Al Ewing style. This is like, he's written other things, but you can tell when he gets a series, when he gets a name or a character, he's like, do what you want with it. And with this, it started with the opening quote.
Yeah.
So I immediately thought that's what made me think, oh, it's going to be dark, but in a more mythological way.
Yeah.
There was the title of the comic, the issue right at the end of the issue. So again, coming back to it.
Very Al Ewing.
Yeah. And, but in between that, it felt very close to similar Thor comics. I read the one previous to this, and I noticed immediately that he was wrapping up a lot of stuff from the previous one. So immediately, and again, needs not to be said, but spoilers going into issue 1 of the new Thor run by Al Ewing. Immediately he's tying up the Bifrost being destroyed, and Loki, who was a he previously, is now a she or a they. They use they for this issue. They were the king of the ice giants, and the frost giants, and then very quickly he goes, I bin that off. Like, you could tell how he was like, I need to change things to get them where I want. But I guess I appreciate he's respecting the previous run, and it does kind of show very much that he's continuing. This is now his run of Thor.
Yeah, but I mean, he's doing a really fun job of like maintaining a certain level of continuity whilst also doing what he wants. It doesn't feel jarring. I liked it. I mean, again, I'm struggling to talk about it because it's just an issue, but I liked it.
Yeah, it's I'm noticing. I think I've got a little more to talk about, only a little more, just because it really fell like to just after what I read from Thor as well. So I noticed that the dialogue was very theatrical, which is common in Thor, but
to merrily go.
Exactly. And I wasn't sure why that was specifically.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they do it in Thor and sometimes they don't. Tends to be he's normally more theatrical when he's around the Avengers.
Yeah.
So for some reason he'll be around the Avengers and he'll be like the yay verily, let's get at thee or whatever. And then as soon as he's by himself, he's a bit more like a bit more realistic, still a little Shakespearean, but a lot less parody, if that makes sense, or a lot less camp with it. I don't know what the best term for it is.
That's an interesting quirk of the fact, and you get this with stuff. It's a quirk of the point in time at which the original Icelandic was translated into English, right? So you get it with great example of an old text that was translated into English, the old King James Bible, right?
Right.
So, the first version of the Christian Bible in English, we think of the Bible as sounding very Bible-y, but that's only because that was how English sounded at the point it was first translated into English, right?
Right.
You read a New International Version of the Bible and it sounds a lot less to verily go, and it sounds a lot less Bible-y. And again, because, the first time that we hear Thor speak in English, it's an older translation that's kind of carried through into the way he's represented in 2023.
Yeah.
And that's just an interesting quirk of translation and language, and, the fact that these translations are rooted in a time period, not necessarily even the time period they were originally written in, but the point in time at which this character was first translated into English. Does that make sense? It
makes sense. I think ultimately when it comes to this kind of stuff, you can, like, a writer can make whatever choice they want, but it would be weird if you took over Thor and he was just speaking like just a normal person.
Well, I mean, I kind of think that with a Thor run, it depends on where you are in Thor's cycle. And so when Thor was first brought into the MCU, it kind of would have made sense for him to speak a bit funny because he's an ancient god from a different country And, that kind of...
Different realm, technically.
Different realm, yeah, this is it. Well, Midgard, Midgard is the realm of the humans. We are currently in Midgard.
Yeah, and he's from Asgard.
He is from Asgard, but Thor spends a lot of time in Midgard.
Yes.
Thor likes Midgard.
I mean, that's addressed specifically here. It's like, he's the king of Asgard, but he also spends a lot of time in Midgard as well.
Yeah, I mean, Odin and Thor both wander Midgard, just kind of hanging out. Odin tends to, like, trick people and be a bit of a knob to the humans, whereas Thor just quite likes the humans. And again, I think that's because he's presented as being the god of farmers and he's there for the people,
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, I mean, the idea that he would speak a bit funny at the start of his run, and then actually once he's spent a bit of time with the Avengers and he's been knocking about with, like, Cap and Tony Stark for a few years, maybe his English would kind of normalize.
Yeah.
And so I actually kind of like that as a characterization and as a character arc thing. But here we get a very fun Thor.
Yeah. And
we get a good old-fashioned, fun, silly Thor.
He's definitely picked up a bit. I wonder if that'll continue as, like, the stakes and the tension naturally raise. Obviously, there was a big foreshadowing of the big bad that's going to be for this, at least this first volume or this first run, this first story arc, whatever. And it looks very dark and it's going to get gritty and stuff. So we'll see if he continues that tone with the character or not.
I would definitely urge the humble listeners, particularly our Trinidadian listeners, to watch out next year, because I'm definitely going to want to come back to this one once we've got a full volume of it.
Yeah. I mean, this time next year, hopefully we should have at least 12 issues, give or take, because sometimes they miss a month for various reasons. But yeah, hopefully we'll have a big one and we can do a proper in-depth run and see if it's matched up to the initial first issue hype.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my nitpick of this one thing, which I wanted to see if it would continue or not, was at one point the character Volstagg, when talking to the Frost Giants, makes reference to frozen dinners. And I was like, if Thor did it, fair enough, because he might have had one. I don't know how experienced Volstagg is with Midgardian frozen cuisine. So that kind of threw me a little bit.
If Thor was in Tesco right now and for a ready meal, what would he buy?
Would he go? Do we think he's going to go, like, for as close to what he knows? So maybe some kind of, like, meat-based gravy kind of thing?
This is the question.
Or would he look at, Korean food?
Well, this is the thing, right? There is a world of frozen ready meals these days. It's not just lasagnas and spag bowls anymore.
Yeah, I mean, if it was 20 years ago, he'd be limited choice. But then for him as well, like, pizza would be exotic to him.
Right.
Yeah. He'd be like, I have no idea what this is, so...
I mean, people forget that pizza required things that were available on 3 different continents. Like, a lot of people had to sail quite far around the world before you could eat a pizza.
And he likes sailing, so...
And he does like to sail. He's an accomplished navalman.
Tell him where those ingredients are, and he'll just kind of whip back and forth, and...
I mean, what's funny is that the Vikings were the first people to get to the place... Well, the first white people to get to the place where one of the ingredients lived. And tomatoes come from the Americas.
Yeah.
Do you know when pizza was invented?
No idea.
Right at the start of the 19th century.
Fair enough.
It's called a margherita because it was made to celebrate Queen Margherita, the Italian queen at the time. And the reason that it's tomato, cheese, and basil is because it's red, white, and green, the 3 colours of the Italian tricolour.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, now you've learned something about Italian mythological lore, or food lore.
Isn't that fascinating?
It is fascinating. It is interesting, yes.
The bread oven in her palace that the first pizza was made in is still there and still functioning. And so, like, very few people get to, but you can't, it is possible to eat a pizza out of the first ever pizza oven.
Now I've got a destination holiday to go on. And to be fair, it's a lot closer than the other ones on my list, so I'll more than happily.
Can we do a Comic Glitter episode from Queen Margherita's palace?
Yeah, and it's just us silently eating pizza. We don't say anything, but you hear the sound. It's like an ASMR. You just hear us munching on pizza, basically.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Well, keep your eyes out for that video coming up in whenever we can afford it.
What, in this economy?
Yeah. Which applies in every single scenario. But yeah, I think we've pretty much covered it, so we'll roll on to the end.
Thank you so much for listening. I had a really fun time talking about this one. I hope you enjoyed the episode. You want to reach out to us, tell us how much of a bad job I did talking about Immortal Thor, you can do so at comicliterate@gmail.com. Leave us a review wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast. Ryan made a sick YouTube video about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles recently that I don't think got enough love. So you should 100% hit up our YouTube channel, Comic Literate on YouTube, to have a look at that.
I like to think that everything I make doesn't get the love it deserves.
I know, but the TMNT video was cool. I did like it a lot.
And we've got a brief success of shorts on TikTok and YouTube Shorts. So if you want to check that out and keep the momentum going, we would surely appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time. Good night.
Thank you. Goodbye.